So good job if you've watched the 2 out of the 3. This is the last one. So here we're going to be talking about all of those little odd cases that go beyond just those simple Mendel's laws. So one gene may have many effects. So far, we've really only covered things that are the Mendelian traits, where one gene controls one trait. However, most genes really affect many traits. So one gene that can affect more than one trait, some examples would be dwarfism, or achondroplasia, or gigantism, or acromegaly. So in these pictures, we do have 2 pictures to the left that are dwarfs, and the X-ray to the right are actually hands of someone who is a giant. So here the example of the acromegaly is Andre the Giant. He did exist. He was this massive hulk of a guy, and it was because he had a gene that affected how he looked. So the inheritance pattern of dwarfism looks a lot like this. So if we have parents who are big A, little a, or heterozygous, and it crosses with a homozygous recessive individual, then you end up with this first cross on the left, which gives you 50% dwarf, 50% normal. So you have a 1-to-1 ratio. And in this case, the dominant allele is what actually codes for dwarfism. So here on the right, if we have 2 heterozygous individuals, then you can end up with 1 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 1 homozygous recessive. Now, if you look at the percentages or the ratios, you actually see a 2-to-1. That is because the homozygous dominant is actually lethal. Those individuals do not live. So, really, you only get a 2-to-1. So when many genes can affect one trait, this is called polygenic inheritance. So it's the additive effects of many genes. So in humans, this can be skin color, height, weight, eye color, intelligence, and behaviors. So we had a couple of questions today about skin color. And skin color is a polygenic trait which is controlled by 3 different genes. And here we're just using the examples with A, B, and C. Depending on how these A, B, and C genes are inherited, this can produce a wide range of shades of color. So most children end up with an intermediate skin color. However, some can be very light and some can be very dark. So here, if you look at this little chart, basically the colored in dots are representing the dominant allele, while the uncolored dots are the recessive. So both parents are heterozygous for each gene. So we have big A, little a, big B, big C, little c. Depending on how those combine, you can have all of the genes inherited be recessive. This would be a very light color, ranging depending on how many dominant alleles that the offspring inherit, up to this complete dominant. So they all get big A, big B, big C, and this is what you get with the darker skin tones. Another example of this is albinism. So the albino gene is basically just the absence of color. And color in humans is controlled by melanin. Melanin is basically the tint of skin. It is what causes you to be more brown or less brown. And melanin is also why you get tan in the summer. So in one class I did touch on this. An example, or another example of this pleiotropic trait is coat color in animals. So for example, labs. You can have a range from a black lab to a yellow lab. There are 2 genes that control this trait. So E and B. E controls whether or not there is color. So if you have a dominant E, that will represent that there will be color, or if it's recessive, then that means no color. So how dark the color will be is determined by the black or brown. So black is dominant over the little b, which is brown. So if you look at the picture, here, this white lab, or a very light yellow lab, basically got two recessive alleles for color, so they do not express color. However, in the B gene, you got two recessive alleles for brown. So you have a very light shade of brown, meaning you get this white golden color. For the next dog, we get no color. However, if it had color, that color would be very expressive. So it would have a dominant color of black. So if you mix this black gene with the allele for no color, you get a golden lab. Move over one. Here the chocolate lab gets the gene for color, so it has a dominant E, but then it got the recessive alleles for brown. So you get this chocolate color. For a black lab, it got the dominant color allele and the dominant black allele. So this is where you get a black lab. If you look at the genotype above each of these pictures of the dogs, you'll see the dashes. Those dashes basically represent the missing alleles that don't matter. So once you have a dominant allele, whatever is next to it doesn't really matter. Because if it's dominant, well, you already have a dominant trait. If it's recessive, then it will be masked by that dominant trait that we already know is there. So the environment may affect genes. This is why the Arctic fox is white in the winter, and then in the summer it has more of a brown coat. So in flowers for hydrangeas, the pH of the soil can influence the color, as well as skin color can be influenced by both genetics and environmental conditions. So if I were to go lay out in the sun all summer, I would come back to school being very darkly tanned. That is caused by the melanin and the UV rays actually interacting with that melanin and causing more of that skin color to show or to be produced. Alright, so to get into the genetics of sex just a little bit. So women and men are very different, but just a few genes can create these differences. So we've already said that there are two sex chromosomes. Females are XX and males are XY. These are called the sex chromosomes. So for sex-linked traits that we have touched on, basically sex chromosomes have other genes on them too, especially the X chromosomes. So hemophilia in humans, it is a genetic disorder where blood does not clot. So if you get a cut, this can be a very dangerous disease because instead of the blood flow stopping on its own, it doesn't. So Duchenne's muscular dystrophy is the loss of muscle control. Affected individuals rarely live past their early 20s. And this disorder is actually because of the absence of an X-linked gene that codes for key muscle proteins. And for the red-green color blindness, instead of seeing the colors red and green, you actually can see shades of gray. And this is a sex-linked gene. The mother's gene does not allow for that color differentiation, while the Y chromosome does not have anything to be dominant over that. So here, you understand that females are XX and males are XY. This is very similar to the blood types. In sex-linked genes, you basically either have an XX or an XY. Those X chromosomes can actually carry an allele. So this is what you're seeing with all of these crazy X with a superscript H and then a Y, or an XX with these two superscripts of a dominant H and a recessive H. So here we have two normal parents because they both express this dominant H allele. But the mother is the carrier. So the XX would be the mother. The mother is a carrier because she has this recessive allele. So in meiosis, the mother will give her child either an X with a dominant allele or an X with a recessive allele. A father will give their child, if it's a girl, okay, she will get a dominant allele. However, if it is a boy, he automatically gets the Y chromosome from the father. So if we come here and do the Punnett square, we have a female who is homozygous dominant. We have a male who has the dominant allele. We have another female who is heterozygous, and another male that is recessive. So Queen Victoria and the descendants actually had hemophilia issue. So this picture is of a pedigree, and a pedigree is basically the mapping out of a family tree. And you can see here that some of these shapes are colored and some of them aren't. And if you are not familiar with Queen Victoria and her descendants, if you look down here, here's William and Harry. So here's the British royal house that we are generally familiar with. We have Princess Diana and Prince Charles. And this actually goes right back up to Queen Victoria, who started the whole royal family here. So as you can see, William and Harry are squares. That is because they are male. In pedigrees, females are depicted as circles, males are depicted as squares. Affected individuals are what is colored in. So here we have Waldemar and Henry. Both of them had the hemophilia issue. However, you also see someone that is half. She is also a female. So, because each of these sons were affected by hemophilia, then the mother must have been a carrier. So we will work with these a little bit more, and they can actually be a lot of fun, especially if you like trying to figure out puzzles. So here we have question marks because we may not have enough information on them, or we just don't know. It is important for you to understand that dominant does not necessarily mean that it is the most common. So because an allele is dominant does not mean that it is better or more common. So for example is polydactyly, being born with more than 5 fingers or 5 toes. Polydactyly is actually controlled by a dominant allele. Here is a picture of it. So individuals are born with these extra fingers or toes. The allele for this extra fingers or extra toes, these extra digits, is a dominant trait. The allele for 5 digits, which is the normal, is actually recessive. So in this case, the recessive allele is far more common than the dominant. And only one individual out of 500 has more than 5 fingers or toes. So 499 out of 500 are homozygous recessive.